Hello everyone, welcome to another JavaScript tutorial video. This tutorial will cover for loops, and we're just going to cover the sort of generalized for loops, so nothing built in, no built-in array methods. These are things like this indexed loop here, the for of loop, and we'll look at for in loops as well. So the first one here is what I would call an indexed loop, and this is sort of the old way of doing for loops. So we'll start with this one. And what we have here is an array of some movies here. So we have The Thing, Alien, and Ginger Snaps. And for instance, if we wanted to just log each one of these to the console, then we can start with setting up a for loop like this. We do the word for, and then inside of our parentheses here, we have our I variable here. We set that to equal 0. And then in the middle here, we have this sort of clause that must be true. So as long as I is less than the length of the array, then we'll do whatever is inside of our loop logic here. And then after that's done, we do whatever is right here. So in this case, we increment I by 1. So this is the most common way of setting up an indexed for loop. And what this looks like is this. So we just log the array at that index that it's currently on. And that happens until this is no longer true and the loop stops. So when I is either greater or equal to the R length, then this will not happen and the loop is done. Okay, so another thing that we can do that's just good to mention here is we can go backwards. And the most common way of doing this is kind of just setting your first starting point and your middle point to be switched. And then you want to switch your last one to go down. So we're starting at, we're setting up I to be the index of the length minus 1, right? Because we're at index 0 on our first one. So 0, 1, 2. And if we take the length, which is 3, 1, 2, 3 in length, minus 1, that gives us our index of 2, which is Ginger Snaps. And then as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, we'll do this, and then we'll reduce I by 1. So now we get this backwards. Okay. So the more modern way of doing a for loop is the for of loop, and this will give us the exact same result as our first one there before we went backwards. So in this way, you can see how more concise it is. We're still setting up a variable. Instead of I, we're actually referring directly to the word, or really it's just the element, but in this case it is a word or at least a title. So for each element or word of the array, we're going to log it to the console, and you'll see that we get the exact result. But let's say, for example, what if we didn't want to log just the word, or we didn't want to do something just to the element, right? And we wanted to look at the index like we do up here. So for example, if we wanted to look at each index, or at least reference each index like this, but we still wanted to use our more modern way, so our for of loop instead, then you can do it like this. So we have destructuring happening right here on our variable, and what this, oh, and then right here, of course, important to mention, we have dot entries with our little parentheses here just to make sure that we're actually calling this function that's built in. So what this does is it gives us an index and then the actual element, right? So if we look at this again, you'll see that we get, oops, let's get rid of this so we don't get too confused here. I know you can do it. There we go. So we have 0 index and then thing, and then 1 alien and 2 ginger snaps, right? Just as we would expect. So what's happening there is if we actually just kind of go out and we'll just look at the, let's do this index and element, because that's really what this is if you don't destructure it. And of course, you don't have to name it index and element. You don't have to name it I in Word, but just it's good to be descriptive. And in this case, you can see that we have our index and our element here. So when we're destructuring things, If we do it like this, then this would only be the index right here, because we're only grabbing the first thing out of there, right? 0, 1, 2. And then if we add another one here, that is always going to be the word, or well, I should just call it the element, really, just to be more generic here. So we'll throw in the element right there, and you'll see that pop up here. So this is basically a way of accessing both your element and your index using the more modern way of doing the for of loop instead of something like this more specific one where you're referring directly to, you know, the clause and everything. This for of loop will always go through every single entry of an array without telling it when to stop and so on. Okay, the last one to look at is the for in loop, and this is going over the keys of an object. So our object here, we have our horror genre, which is this one right here. And then we have our comedy genre, which is what we do in the shadows, Groundhog Day, and Office Space. And so really we could just name this key if we wanted to, and that's really what we're looking at. So let's actually just look at the key first without looking at the specific value here. So we have our horror and our comedy key right there. So each key is logged there, and if we wanted to specifically look at the value of each of those keys, then we would just have to refer to it as looking at movies itself, the object at that key, basically. So we'll get this entire array, and then we'll get this entire array here. And we'll also get the key directly before, since I kept that in. But yes, we'll get this one and this one. And then you might be wondering, well, what if we wanted to go into those? Well, you can do a nested loop, I suppose, something like this, or const value in movies key. Actually, so this would be of, since we're not looking at an object anymore, so this would now be of instead of in. And maybe if we wanted to be specific, since we know these are movies, instead of calling it value, we could just call it movie. And let's also just get rid of this. No, we'll leave that one there. That's fine. Okay, so we have our entire list here, and then we have it broken down, right? So this is the value of this object here, and then we just go through each one of those movies one at a time, and then we do the same for the comedy genre here. Okay, so that's kind of the main for loops here. That's leaving out all the built-in array loops, but these are the more general ones that you can use pretty much anywhere.